It's March the 8th, which is auspicious for two things: the rentrée, the return of children to school across the UK, and it's International Women's Day. And I'm delighted to welcome Katie Dulake from Mitsubishi Motors to a conversation with me. My name's Mark Bainbridge, co-founder of Dragonfly AI. So, Katie, great. Well, thank you for joining me this morning. It's lovely to see you. I should point out Katie is both a friend and a former colleague, and I think I'd safely say a better marketer than I ever was. And you're now working with Mitsubishi, Katie. I mean, it's been a really interesting year for all of us. And I think, the market has been quite hard to understand in many ways. I think, it's been behind more closed doors than we've been previously used to. I just thought it might be interesting for you to reflect a little on the sort of trends that you're seeing across the marketing and communication space at the moment you found interesting in the last period.
As you say, I think, unprecedented times is one of the most worn out phrases from the past year. And certainly, it has been remarkable. I think the biggest challenge for automotive has been dealing with the fact that for much of the period, we've not been able to offer test drives, which is the key experiential way through which most consumers decide if they're going to buy a car or not. So that's been, I think, the biggest thing for us all to get our heads around. There's been a big discussion around, buying online. And, at Mitsubishi, we do have a buy online site that has, received kind of record levels of interest. Whether that then goes on to actually translate into sales has not necessarily always been the case, although we have seen an upward trend. And I think that increased digitization has been true of, lots of sectors, not just automotive, but, financial services, I know, have had, really unprecedented levels of uptake of, customers engaging digitally with them. So I think that's a real challenge for us all to kind of negotiate that new territories, especially when you can't actually get, people into your cars. So we've had to spend a lot of time looking at customer journeys, thinking about how we can make sure that we're keeping customers warm. Whereas before, everything in a marketing journey would be about pushing to a test drive action. Without that, we've had to think about what else we can offer people, what discussions we can have with them, how we can fulfill bits of information needs that they might have. So lots of kind of video walk rounds, and we've invested a lot in that technology. So it's been really interesting.
Do you think that the last year, we are coming up for a year since all this kind of dreadful business kicked off, do you think it's accelerated things that which were going to happen anyway, or do you think we've had to adapt to new behaviours as a result of circumstance?
I think it's definitely accelerated things. Again, I mentioned financial services who've all, many of them have smashed their digital engagement targets just because people have had no other alternative. I think it's kind of early days to tell what things are going to look like when we come out the other side. And I think that's one of the really big challenges at the moment. We're all kind of scrambling to work out what the new normal is going to look like. I'm not sure that's clear. Some of the trends have been around, an increased interest on buying online. I said earlier, some people have, bought online. I think that's easier if you've got lots of experience of a brand and you're very familiar with the model. But for new customers coming in, I think that's always going to be a challenge to buy a car without having experienced it. And so I think it remains to be seen the extent to which we're going to kind of move away from the test drive.
So I think it's really interesting. I think, the behavioural marketers would say, it takes 3 weeks to change behaviour, and here we are sort of, 12 months later. I wonder whether the point of elasticity is past the point of return for quite a lot of things. I'm thinking about, the nature of how we work. Not having to commute huge distances and the ability to work from home, reasonably effectively on the whole, I think is potentially likely to change how we work.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. I think there's lots of changes there. And the implications for automotive, again, on one hand, we're seeing, people using their cars probably less than ever. That's married up with a general distrust of public transport. And certainly, traffic levels have not fallen, I think, as significantly as I think, government sources thought they would. So I think we're still going to have lots of demand for automotives and buying cars. The acceleration of that, that digital trend is really interesting. And I think one of the things around lockdown has been, the extent to which our expectations have all increased. We are all now much happier using digital sites. That Amazon have obviously been a clear winner. So we're all starting to kind of expect Amazon levels of customer service, which whether you agree with their business model or not, to be able to kind of click your order in 1 minute and receive it that evening, in some cases is remarkable. And that has the effect of driving up expectation for everybody. And it's been interesting watching, the performance of previously, high performing brands in terms of, net promoter scores. I don't think there are many brands that people are particularly happy with at the moment, but Just Eat, Amazon, the brands that make online experience really, really simple and clear and quick and easy have done really, really well. And the rest of us are just playing catch up against that. So how that plays out going forward is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, and of course, Amazon have just launched their first sort of retail experience in London, I think last week, which is phenomenal. Obviously, we listen carefully to what we're hearing about, their future plans. And I think one of the ideas they're playing with at the moment is the idea that they're going to start sending products on spec based on what you like, because it's very easy for them to dispatch and take away. They can remove stuff. And if they increment sales by 10% by sending 3 things you weren't expecting to see, and you just like the look of it, absolutely. Why wouldn't you? So I think, there's a whole new genre of ideas emerging out of this new world. So what opportunities and challenges have you kind of seen in your industry, Katie?
I think it's great to see that focus. If people's expectations for customer service are higher, I think that's really strong. I think, as someone who's relatively new into automotive, it's a theme that I think in the past has been a little bit problematic. So I think it's great news to have that kind of that pressure on customer service formalized, and so that we see some good out of this, because I think that the dealer experience can be quite inconsistent, and I think there's a huge opportunity in there to kind of offer really strong customer service in the way that customers want it, rather than in the way that automotive manufacturers feel it should be given. So I think that's a really interesting opportunity. So if some brands can get that right, that would be a strong differentiator. Obviously, in automotive, we have trends around, a lot of the big trends are around, the move to electric. And I think that's going to be interesting. And again, opens up questions about car ownership models, especially within an urban environment where you don't necessarily have the infrastructure for electric cars. So I think there's some really interesting, potential outcomes here. And I think it's just a matter of time before we work out how this is all going. I think things are moving so quick with the lifting of lockdown elements. I think that will become clearer sooner. But for now, it's just a matter of trying to kind of spot the trends as they're emerging, really.
Yeah, I think so. So obviously, technology engagement changes across sector, depending, I suppose, on the level of activity. I mean, we've seen a huge surge in retail and FMCG because, of course, we all need to eat and we all need to shop. And as we said earlier, these big digital aisles are becoming increasingly more important, as is the expectation around that kind of their service propositions and delivery. I mean, the notion 10 years ago that you could order something same day and have it materialize on your doorstep in a package was kind of, no one could kind of conceive of, how it would work. And having the benefit of living out in a rural community, I'd say that the last mile delivery is a very important part of that. And you're seeing so many different service propositions sort of, finishing that last delivery piece.
And you're right. And I think hospitality in particular has been really interesting. There are some sectors that have been really battered by the COVID restrictions, but I think hospitality have constantly been the sector that have amazed and delighted me. The extent to which they've just kind of pivoted, have completely changed their offering, have become much more focused on, how they can deliver their product and what product they're delivering and all that good stuff. Like Just Eat are a really interesting brand. And I think, they're not the half of it. There's so many small, startup businesses out there, or small scale businesses, that have just really, really risen to the challenge and done some really interesting things.
Mm. No, I don't think, it's almost that this was the perfect storm for them in some ways, to suddenly have, the UK or the world in some instances, in some various states of lockdown, made us more reliant on these new channels. So I think, I don't know whether it was very clever anticipatory sort of, strategy or a bit of a blend of that and some good old fashioned luck. But I mean, there are certainly some businesses who have really flourished. I think there's been a bit of a delayering, of sectors depending on their relevancy, and it has been a tough old time. But look, we're a startup stroke scale up that sort of, we launched the year before the kind of pandemic, and our first year was very typical of a startup. Our second year was unpredictable, to say the very least. I mean, who could have imagined? I mean, we've done okay because, again, I think in the digital space, we do offer a solution that optimizes and accelerates performance. Now, you're a Dragonfly user, your team at Mitsubishi. Could you give us a few thoughts on how it's helped in your world?
So the Dragonfly platform has been really helpful. We've used it primarily in terms of an extra kind of tool in our toolbox for evaluating the creative outputs from our agencies. It's kind of removed the need to have to kind of test everything in a live environment. And, much more than that, it's actually allowed us to change the proposition in some cases. We typically run through early creative outputs through the platform and adjust accordingly. And that could be on really kind of, we're a small brand, and the way that we stand out, we have to kind of approach things in two ways. We have to differentiate either by relentlessly optimizing everything, to get these incremental improvements to what we do. And the other way is to try and, really stand out and punch above our weight. And I think the way that Dragonfly helps us is everything from, we find out that green performs better than pink in this particular digital ad. We can incrementally improve the response rates on those. And then it really is as fundamental as we had a proposition which had three parts to it. And the way we were describing that proposition just wasn't performing well in Dragonfly. We could see that it was a bit of a pickle, bit of a mess, and it wasn't coming across in the way that we wanted it to. And so we reformulated that proposition and ran that through the model so we could see that improvement. And things like that are really key for us because, we're not one of the bigger players. So to be able to change and adjust and get that insight that we would never have until we were out in a live environment normally, by which point, with the best of the world, it's too late, really. So to get that insight up front and be able to make those changes and those improvements has been brilliant for us. It's really improved our efficiency, and that's been a strong focus for us. The last few months we've had better than ever ROI and response rates on our digital advertising, which is incredibly important to us, especially at the moment. And I have no doubt that that's due to the kind of pre-prep that we've done using Dragonfly.
Well, that's really, really interesting to hear, and thank you for that. I mean, we're always delighted to hear how user experiences are working with Dragonfly, because it has such a versatile sort of application, really. I mean, we have, Harrod's using it for visual merchandising. You guys are looking at it for digital creative performance. It's quite a broad solution in terms of what it can do. Now, I mean, obviously reflecting on the fact today is International Women's Day, what advice would you give to anyone who's kind of thinking about entering into your sector from your own experiences?
I think, it's a great sector to be involved in. There's so much going on, and so many of these interesting big debates, around, tech, environmentalism, it's such a rich environment. It's really important to get out there and make sure that you're getting as much experience as you can. And by that, I don't necessarily mean formal work experience, but that you're just, having as many conversations as you can, you're learning as much as you can. And you need to be prepared to accept that you might not have this kind of perfect linear, career that just goes up. I'm not sure those exist anymore, but we still have this expectation that, you will jump from one role to the next in a, perfectly ascending ladder. I think you need to be able to jump from role to role, which will sometimes be sideways, depending on the experience that you need to get or the things that you're finding interesting. So, if you're interested in, finding out a bit more about, how consumers tick, and you get the opportunity to kind of work agency side, with perhaps a data agency or research agency, that is all really relevant experience. So you should go for it.
Thanks so much, Katie. As always, very sage advice. So I'm just going to wrap up now. I'm Mark Bainbridge, co-founder of Dragonfly. I've been talking to Katie Dulake, marketing leader from Mitsubishi Motors. It's been a pleasure seeing you, chatting and listening to your perspective. Thanks so much, Katie.
Thank you.